So I think the two biggest challenges, and there are certainly more, but the two big ones are, one, the availability of rolling stock, in order to, because you can ask for the RFPs, you're going to get responses, but are the manufacturers actually making at a rate of production that can meet demand? That's number one. And number two is the ad hoc process for getting approvals from NHTSA to operate on public roads.
Thank you. Stan.
I'm going to add to that the systems level approach that Sam spoke of. It seems like for the last 3 years we've been fixated on vehicle technology, and hopefully maybe it's the optimistic side that when we're talking about applications, we're talking with cities and municipalities that wants to harness this to solve their problems, and it takes the discussion away from individual vehicle gizmos, but which still need to be perfected, granted, to how do we harness this to serve a university, to serve the CBD, to serve whatever the objectives of that community are. And I think that's where a lot of work needs to take place.
Hi, Steve Buckley, WSP. I perhaps a little bit more of a longer term, but going back to Bern's presentation here, I guess the one thing, Bern, I'm struggling with is, as we sort of think through how this unfolds, I am a little skeptical of the model you're proposing, from the sense that that government's going to be ahead of this, that government's going to be at the center of this. At least in the U.S., this is being entirely driven by market and the industry right now. And I guess I'm curious as to how you arrived that we're going to somehow get government to procure software systems that are going to manage and deploy all this stuff. And maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that, just so that I can get my head around that.
The particular system that I described as the procurement platform is free to government. Government doesn't have to do anything. They just have to say what they want to have happen and have the existing systems that are already in place that are not automated. The Ubers and Lyfts are not automated, but to supply those current requirements. A lot of what goes on in these meetings is what can we do in the next 3 years to get ready for the 10 years after that. I'm talking about what can we do to deploy the systems that are already out there, already in place, already being operated, and already congesting and already taking away from our ridership. What can we do for those now? Not that that's a permanent solution, but that's a bridging solution until we get to those fleets that we're planning over the next 3 or 13 or 20 years. So if you're Uber and you dominate the entire market and that's it, and then you wouldn't. If in fact that's the case, which is not the case, there are other players.
When I go into Amtrak, it gives me a coupon if I take Lyft. So, I mean, that would be just one, idea about the connectivity.
It's not just governments that want to project how rides are provided. There's another customer for that which I didn't describe, which is the retail. In other words, retail operators want to draw shoppers to their whatever they're retailing. They can also subsidize rides as well. So it's people want to cause people to come or go somewhere or do something, whether it's a government social equity thing or whether it's a commercial.
I think Shannon's points, we're going to go back to your point about the Amtrak and Lyft. You're seeing a lot of those interesting behaviors. So Uber very quietly ended their 2-point membership deal with Amex. And then Lyft goes out and announces that we are now continuing our Delta Airlines relationship. So you're getting all those miles. And you're seeing miles and points change behaviors. And Lyft is by far doing the best job with that. And you're going to continue to see that as new platforms come around. Oh, well, you can get miles and points. And the way that changes behavior is something that we really have to watch.
I'm sorry to say so, but I think we are all a bit out of the track here. Because the problem is that we are all discussing as if we had level 5 automation ready to be deployed, which is not. And it will not be for a long time. So what we have right now, it's a promise from Google, we'll see how it ends up, or we have our shuttle systems. Okay, these are the only things that have proven to work. Now, they all have huge problems. The shuttle systems have problems because they really don't deal well with certain open environment. They do have problems of speed, they do have problems of reliability, but at least they are a product. You can go to Local Motors or to any others and buy one, okay? When you go to Google and you say, can I buy your car? They say, what? Okay, so what we have now is that we need to think about this as a transport system, because the only way in which we can get anything out of it is actually knowing that we buy a fleet for a specific purpose of doing certain service in a certain area, which needs a fleet supervisor, which need an employee, which need a lot of things. We are completely neglecting here. So the point is, what we are here is not discussing when Uber will be automated, because Uber has the characteristics of picking you up wherever you want and bringing you wherever you want, which is not going to happen anytime soon with an automated vehicle. So the point here is we need to focus on what is actually feasible. And for me, the point is follow the money. What actually can be a transport system which instead of losing money, can make money.
Oh, no, it's good, thank you. So I want to follow up that. I think it's a great question to ask, where's the money coming from? So I would ask Sam, who did a great explanation of the system they have in Houston, how are they going to pay for that? He said you got people with money. Are the students going to pay part? Is it part of their parking and transportation fee? And the other is the application. And I'd like to hear Wessel talk about how a company like To Get There would solve the problem. If, although I know you all do the transportation, but you don't do the infrastructure. So Sam's dealing with infrastructure and vehicles, the total package. Cost, Sam.
At this point, the urgency among our transportation agencies in Houston is growing because of this tidal wave that's coming. In some of my talks, I liken it to a Category 5 hurricane is coming. The question is, are we going to recognize that it's coming and prepare to live in the middle of the hurricane because it's coming? That's kind of the awakening in Houston. So the bringing a few $1 million to the table to get the first mile, last mile system running, when it's a combination of the city of Houston and Metro combined, they can handle that. Now, obviously, they are very astute in positioning for federal funding, so they're going to put money in. The demonstration is checks being written by Metro and City of Houston. The next phase, they will be positioning to see what grants can be obtained, whether FTA would consider putting it in New Starts, but those steps will be thoroughly pursued. But if for the next phase, for the extension to the first light rail system, if that's an operational system with all the elements I've described is a $4 or $5 million investment, I think they're prepared to step up and each write a check for $2.5 million because they know we have to move forward. So they're going to be pursuing this through initially their own seed money and then working every angle we can with federal funds when and how they're available. But it's far beyond students paying an extra $10 on their tuition or something like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something. If you guys are on my mailing list, I will, or if you want me to mail you information on what I'm about to tell you, just give me a business card on the way out. But Rhode Island DOT right now has an active RFP on the street that is incredibly innovative, dealing with all of these issues that we just talked about, and it's really focused on getting a fixed route shuttle going on a route TBD by the bidder, application and payment and longer term integration with a fare system that integrates with their current transit system, preferably using an app, and all this stuff's outlined in the RFP, but it is truly a solutions-based contract. There isn't a set dollar amount for it, and I would just take issue that the only thing this is about is a level 4 shuttle, understanding all the limitations that it has, but they're looking to get something deployed and demonstrated as soon as they possibly can that evolves with the technology over time and ultimately becomes a fare-based service.
Thanks. Okay. You and then get you next. And then.
What you described with the harmonized system reminds me of something my economics professor said at San Jose State 30 years ago. Instead of creating a transit system, maybe it's cheaper to give everyone $5 for a cab or something. And that wasn't practically possible, right, in those days, because, but it seems like the middleware you're providing could allow an agency to decide, do we want to invest in rolling stock, or would it be cheaper to kind of subcontract this out? And is that correct? Is that kind of where it allows that sort of thing, that flexibility?
It already exists and it's free. It's not a hard system to build. What the issue is, there's already systems in place, exactly to your point, but the systems that we're deciding to build over the next 3 and 13 and 30 years would also feed into the same system. So that system I've described doesn't matter. It doesn't care whether there's a driver or not. What it cares is that there's authorities that want what's happening now to perform in a certain way. We'd like Lyft and Uber to drop people off at the transit, or we'd like them to pick up disability rides, or whatever it is that local authority wants to have happen. It's exactly like your professor's saying. Let's use what's already in place while we're waiting for the new stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And if I can get us back on the track that Professor Alessandri put us back on. So in talking about the autonomous systems and where they're at today and developing a system of autonomous vehicles. So I actually come from a transit agency in Jacksonville, Florida, where we're working on just that. So we have a 2.5-mile automated people mover system from the 80s. And so the vehicles are obsolete. We're working to retrofit this elevated track with autonomous vehicles. And so our organization, pretty much the entire organization, is engaged in discussions about what pieces are needed for that system. And so, of course, the shuttles that we're testing today on our test track, they're level 4 autonomous. And of course, the supervisory system is needed. There are some off the shelf, but they have limitations. And for a transit operations context, there's key systems that really aren't there and integrated in place. Like if you think about it, once you get the safety driver off, you need some kind of fare payment system that can handle that situation where there's no one there to remind them that there is a fare. And then, when you have incidents on the vehicle, you need to be able to visually see what's happening on that vehicle. And then that comes into limitations in telecommunication systems. If you have real-time video feeds on moving vehicles, 4G may not be able to handle that. And so, do we have to wait for 5G? But so there's all these different elements, including cybersecurity. That once you have a fleet that's managed like that, that's going to be a target for hackers. One thing we're partnering with a group out of the Kennedy Space Center. It's an information sharing and analysis organization. They were started by the executive order from the Obama administration, but what they are is it's really a collaboration of public and private entities that share information about cyber threats and attacks so that the entire community can respond more quickly. So, that's another piece we're doing, but there's all these elements that we're trying to pull together currently. We have small RFPs going out for, like I mentioned, we have a test track. We're also looking to do a test track on a small section of the elevated structure very soon. So, please keep track of us, and, there's more to come.
My point now is, are we thinking to just deploy another transit system? Are we thinking that we need to get federal or state or city money to make the infrastructures and then eventually find some private operators? Because I don't think that this is the right way. My point here is, it is a transport system. It needs somehow to be planned and agreed with the city, but then it needs to be funded by private operators that will need to create something that the people will want to pay. So it needs not to be included in the same yearly ticket that you get to go anywhere, because this is the death of any private initiative. You need to pay with your phone for the ride you take. And the ride you take might be that off-peak time is the ride to the closest station. Peak time is the ride to the closest transit station, or it might be off-peak time, it might be a ride up to wherever you want. But the point is that, of course, the city has a role. Of course, the government has a role. But unless we leverage private money on one side, and this is possible, because unlike TNC, which needed huge investment up front, even to start demonstrating that it were financially viable. Okay, so nobody in 30 years they were available, nobody ever invested enough to get a network wide enough to really demonstrate it was financially sustainable. If we go to any PRT build, it's been financially a bloodbath, as it is any demonstration. We paid 9 million to carry 60,000 passengers. This is not affordable. So the point is, you need to go to have something which is affordable, something which is profitable, something which is not a public transport, something which is complementary to public transport, which is integrated with public transport, regulated in a similar way to public transport, but it needs to be private. The beauty of Uber is that I can decide how much to pay depending on the quality of the ride I want.